Hello! Today I'm finally answering some more of your questions about my weird and traumatic childhood. Instead of just answering questions in random order, I've decided I'm going to do an iceberg type video explaining the different aspects of it because I think it will make more sense broken down that way and everything will have a lot more context. So as iceberg videos go, I will be starting with the more known and mild trauma, and the lower levels will get more severe. I'm going to be covering some potentially upsetting topics in this video, including but not necessarily limited to confinement, neglect, near-death experiences, physical violence, and mild CSA. Before we get started, I do want to say thank you to everyone who commented on and messaged me about my last video. I wasn't expecting to hear from so many people with similar experiences. Being told that my video was having a positive impact in even one person's life, let alone the dozens of comments that I got saying that and messages, was a new experience, and it motivates me to keep sharing and keep speaking out, so hopefully what happened to me and us doesn't happen to anyone else. If you haven't seen my first video talking about this, I would recommend giving it a watch first because it does cover a lot of the broad strokes of my childhood, but TLDR, I was confined to one room for the first 16 years of my life. I was not sent to school, I was abused, I was neglected, and this was all mostly done by my father, and my mother was complacent. Now that we know all that, let's get into the details. So at the top of the iceberg, I'm going to start off with hoarding. The fact that I lived in a hoarder house and what that was like. And I'm putting that at the top because it's not direct abuse. It can be an abusive situation. I don't think it's a healthy environment, but it's not abuse strictly speaking if someone is a hoarder. And I don't think that if someone has the compulsion to be a hoarder that it makes them a bad person. I haven't seen much of the Hoarders TV series or similar videos, but it would fit right in with what I've seen of those shows. Every room, as far as I know, was filled with random things. And I can still describe in detail what the room that I lived in looked like. So on one side of the room, there were stacks of newspapers that blocked the view of the window. There was a window, but it only really let in light at the top crack, and it would kind of hit the ceiling and illuminate the room a bit, but we never looked out the window, and we pretty much just had no access to it. So there were stacks of newspapers there. In one corner there was a coffee table, and under that there were just boxes of things. On top of it there were piles of like comforters and pillows that weren't necessarily used. On top of some of the stacks of newspapers was where the boombox was, the radio that everyone used, and a clock. And then in the earlier years of my life, there was a large mattress propped up against one of the shorter walls of the room. And eventually that was taken out. I don't know why, but it was either replaced by or in its place behind it, there were these huge flattened cardboard boxes, and those remained there for the rest of my time there. And then the flaps of them would lean down, and those kind of made a little shelf. And so my sister and I would use that as space to put some things, and it was kind of a cool little like awning in my mind to that side of the room. On the other side of the room there was more boxes, and those were, to my knowledge, filled with toiletries, like shampoo, boxes of pads, and like diapers and things, just stuff that was bought for the sake of buying things because it was on sale and then never used. Those things expired, those things went to waste, and I don't think anything ever came of them. Next to those, there was a very large metal toolbox one of those ones that had like tons of drawers and pads in them, like for your tools. It was empty, but I do think we ended up storing some things in there. It couldn't store much because it was just a bunch of very thin drawers. So I think it was just like magazines and paper and small things. And on top of that toolbox was a large CRT television. The other wall, I think, had a closet. There was stuff in the closet, but I have no idea what was in the closet because there was stuff in front of the closet. I do remember that the closet also had some sort of either heating or electrical element for the whole house, so sometimes it did have to be open, and that was an ordeal, because we would have to pull things away from the closet, get into it, and then put everything back. The livable space in the room that I grew up in, I remember kind of measuring it with my body when I was a teenager. I could barely lay down one way, and I could lay down the other way, and I had a couple extra feet. So I think it was 5 by 8. As far as hoarding in the rest of the house, I didn't get to see much of that, but from what I've been told, it was like that in every other room. I was in my parents' bedroom one time in my entire life that I can remember, and I don't have a good memory of it, but I remember stuff everywhere, stuff blocking the window, and there were a lot of piles of newspaper near the front door, almost blocking the front door, where we would have to basically climb over them. I don't know if those were put there to prevent me as a small child from climbing over them and trying to walk out the front door. I don't know if it just happened to be there and it also kept me from climbing over them. But yeah, I remember being passed over the stack, and my parents and older sister would climb over it. And then as I got older, I think the stacks did get a little lower, and I was able to step over them. And I think eventually they were gone, or they were for a very short time, but most of the time they were kind of blocking the front door. I do wish there was any sort of photos of the interior of the house, like on Zillow or something, that would make explaining where things were much easier, because I could at least say, well, here's this room, but over here was this, or I could draw and edit it in. I do have this very crude drawing that I did of the layout of the room from a top-down view that I'll be inserting, so I hope that helps. Still on level 1 of the iceberg, we have confinement. Brought to you by this lovely comment: how were you confined to one room if you were actually not at all? So in my first video, I explained that I was confined to one bedroom of the room. I only left it when I was escorted to go to the bathroom or I was escorted outside. I never saw the rest of the house other than the hallway and the one time that I was in my parents' bedroom when I was 6, and I was almost unconscious, so I don't remember what it looked like. I've never seen the kitchen or the living room, and I was never able to exit that room without permission. I spent, I would say, 90% at least, if not more, of the first 16 years of my life in that room, knowing that if I left it, I would be severely punished. I do believe that counts as confinement. There are literal kidnapping victims who are taken out on trips and errands with their captors. I believe they're still confined. On very rare occasions, we would go to my grandparents' house, and sometimes we would be taken with my parents to the grocery store and to doctor's appointments. And again, this room wasn't even the size of a regular room. It was not a regular bedroom. It was a room with hoarded junk on all sides and no bed, no chairs. I just sat on the floor, slept on the floor, ate on the floor. And the last thing on level 1 is no school. So because I was confined, I obviously was not sent to school. I was never enrolled, never registered, And while I could have been homeschooled, and that is what my parents told everyone that we were doing, that is what I said was happening because that's just what I was told, I wasn't schooled in any way. My parents didn't teach me anything deliberately. My sister taught me to read when I was 3, but I don't believe they had any plans to teach me to read or anything further. And I was never enrolled in a homeschooling program. I was never registered as a homeschooled child. I was never given any lesson plan, any curriculum, any home classes. I never took tests. And I've never experienced what it is like to go to school. And so we have this comment from my friend asking, what is it like for you to listen to people talk about their completely normal school experiences, like square pizza or the parachute in gym, and have no idea what they're talking about? And you're right. I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't know what the parachute in gym means, and I'm afraid to ask. I can understand the concept of square pizza. I'm assuming that's what school pizza is shaped like. But yeah, it happens fairly often, and it is a joke and a meme among my friends now to just say, oh, you wouldn't get that, you didn't go to school, even just about basic things. Because often someone will say, oh, so you know how in school you do this? And I'm just like, no? What? I don't understand that. That's not, like a basic knowledge base that I have. Thankfully, it hasn't come up that much, and I don't think it makes me seem that weird. I don't think I stand out as a homeschooled kid or an unschooled kid, but yeah, I just have no association or connection to a lot of those basic things. And I definitely feel like I missed out on that. I've never, played at recess. I've never actually played with other children. So it's not super difficult or sensitive, but I definitely don't know or relate to a lot of those experiences. Can someone please explain what the parachute in gym is? Because I have no idea what that means. So now we're on level 2. These are some things that I haven't spoken about in my previous video as much, and these are things that I think I'm a little more traumatized by as an adult. So let's get a little deeper. Starting off with something that I don't think is good, but I think is a fairly common punishment and not necessarily widely recognized as abusive, which is silent treatment. I don't know exactly how this is usually done. I don't know many people who have really experienced this as a punishment, but in my experience, it would pretty much just happen suddenly and randomly, and I wouldn't know what precipitated it. Because a lot of times rules weren't lined out ahead of time. I would just find out that I had done something wrong by doing it and receiving a negative reaction. In my earlier childhood, the negative reaction would typically be physical punishment, so I could at least figure it out that way because it was usually instantaneous. With silent treatment and being ignored, I didn't always notice it immediately, and so as a child I would have to then start rethinking everything I had done in the past few hours or that day, and just kind of play detective to figure out why I was suddenly being ignored, and also figure out what to do to end it. And I couldn't figure that out on my own at first. My sister kind of had to explain it to me, having experienced it herself, that you would basically just have to say, I'm sorry for X. And as soon as I would say that, things would just suddenly be normal. There would be no discussion of what I did wrong. There would be no, well, here's what you did. here's why you shouldn't do it, thank you for apologizing, we're good, let's get back to normal, my father would just suddenly act as if he hadn't been ignoring me. And so it was very unsettling to just see his demeanor go from pretending I didn't exist whatsoever to being normal and like being a buddy. And whenever he was doing this silent treatment and pretending I didn't exist, that included my basic needs as well. So if I said I needed to go to the bathroom, if I needed water, which were basically the only two things that I could ask for and get, that was ignored as well. Next up, we have malnourishment. And we have a comment, I noticed no one asked about food. What were meals like? Could you choose or make your own food from the kitchen at all? The short answer is no. The long answer is hell no. I never saw the kitchen of my childhood home. I have no idea what it looked like. I was never in it. Unless I was a baby and I have no memory of it. As I said earlier, I was almost exclusively kept to that one room. All meals for the entire family were eaten in that one room because it was the only room that I could be in. So my father would spend a lot of the day cooking in the kitchen. I know he spent a lot of time cooking. He was very specific and detailed about meals and how things were prepared. For instance, he would get like a frozen burrito, but he would not microwave it. He would have to cook it for like the full 45 minutes in the oven, and that kind of applied to everything. He didn't do things quickly. I don't even know if we had a microwave, actually. I have no idea. I think we might have just had the stove and the oven. I think when I was much younger, if I was hungry, he would give me a snack, but that stopped when I was 6, which I'm going to get into in the next topic. But from then on, most of the time there would just be maybe one small meal early in the day and then the large meal, and sometimes the large meal would be the only meal. And if the large meal didn't work out in time, sometimes it would be skipped. Like if it was just taking too long to get together, it would be skipped entirely and we would just go to bed. So there would be some days where all I had for the course of an entire 24 hours was a Hawaiian roll with cheese. The only time I was allowed to feed myself was under very strict urgent circumstances. If my blood sugar was low, there was a can of peanut M&Ms always in the room, and I kind of had to make a judgment call and hope that I was low enough to warrant eating 2 to 4 of them. And if I wasn't actually low, if I felt low but I was wrong, or if I did it too soon before asking for my blood sugar to be checked and to be fed with permission, that would also be kind of... I don't remember ever being actually punished for it, but there was just kind of an aura of don't have these unless you really urgently need to. So sometimes I would feel that my blood sugar was low, but I would wait longer to do anything about it because I needed to make sure that when I was checked, it was low enough to show that I took those appropriately. And lastly, on level 2, we have being in the dark a lot because I wasn't allowed to use the light switch in that room. So I spent a lot of time alone in that room because during the day, my sister would usually be outside with our father helping him do yard work. As I said in the previous video, he would do landscaping for our unit as well as the other units that the landlord owned to take some money off of the rent. And instead of doing that himself, he made his children help, mostly my sister. So they would be out doing that, and they would sometimes be outside doing that until well past dusk and into dark. And I was not allowed to use the light switch in that room. So while it was daytime, there was usually sufficient light for me to be able to read on my own or whatever, just to exist in the room and see what was around me. As it would get dim, I really hated the period of time, not so much being in pitch black, but I hated the dusk period where it was just too dim to do anything really. It was too dim to read, it was too dim to really function. And so now as an adult, I know a lot of people who hate the big light. I love the big light. I do have a routine where at a certain time of night, I switch to a lamp, and that helps me get ready for bed. But if I'm awake and doing things, or if I'm eating, or if I am at a friend's house, I usually want the big light because I don't like it not being bright enough for me to see what I'm doing. It reminds me of just being in the room, too dim to see anything, and not being able to do anything about the darkness. I'm not afraid of the dark. I like being in the dark, I like going out at night, and I like sleeping in pitch black conditions, but something about that murky dusk I don't like. Next, we have overfeeding. So while I was malnourished and often not fed for long periods of time, when it was feeding time or dinner time or whatever, meal time of the day, I was expected and required to eat everything that was given to me. And a lot of times I was happy to do that because I was very hungry and I would just want to make sure I ate as much as I could because I didn't know the next time I'd be able to eat. But there are many times where I was so full, but I just had to eat everything. And I know that's not a very unique thing. I know a lot of people, maybe not today's parents, but I know a lot of people grew up having to eat everything on your plate. But I think it's a little different considering the scale of the meals that I was given, and the fact that there would be this huge meal prepared, and then usually an hour or so later when I'm still full, he would also have a dessert prepared for me. And the dessert was not a great dessert. Like, I will stuff myself for a great dessert. I have a dessert stomach. But dessert would typically be half of a really stale protein bar, like a protein bar that's just meant to be a protein bar, like for nutrition, for working out, and a couple like a handful of peanuts, dry peanuts. And it got so rough, like so difficult to eat that I did start hiding and not eating the peanuts, and I was terrified that my hoard of uneaten peanuts would be found. I don't think it ever was. But I would hide them, and maybe I would sometimes eat them when I was, like, starving on another day. But for a while I just hated peanuts because I would have to eat them, and I was often not given much water along with them. So they would just become dry and just disgusting to eat. On that note of not having water to go with the peanuts, I was also not given water as much as I should have been. I think partly so I wouldn't have to be taken to the bathroom as much, I do remember in my early teens, I had like my water cup, which was a to-go cup from like a restaurant, like a kids to-go drink cup. And typically, if I said, I'm out of water, he would refill my water. And that was pretty normal, and I believed that was the routine, you know? If I'm out of water, I just let him know I'm out of water. One day, he just didn't acknowledge that, and so I said it again, and I didn't understand why he wasn't giving it. I was trying to figure out if it was another silent treatment, ignoring punishment, but he wasn't ignoring me. He was acting normal in every other way. He just wasn't acknowledging that I was out of water. And I was very confused because that had always been the routine. I'm out of water, I get water. And I remember getting just very thirsty that day because it was like hours going by and I didn't know what was going on. So eventually he asked me if I wanted water, and I said yes, and he said, oh, well, you should have asked for it. And so after that, I realized that it had suddenly changed to, I have to say, can I have some water? Which was never explained to me. I just had to figure it out from that incident. And by that point, I think I was 14 or so, I really didn't like him. And I was as resistant to behaving how he wanted as I could be without causing problems for myself. So I did not want to be asking him for anything. I didn't want to kind of bow to what he wanted, so I would just not ask for water. And I would just be dehydrated and really thirsty rather than say, can I have some water because you changed the rules and now I have to say, can I have some water? And it's not that I think there's a problem with asking for it and being polite, but the fact that it was just changed up on me and not explained, and he would rather I be thirsty and dehydrated than just tell me, oh, by the way, you have to ask a certain way now. That's the problem. Lastly, on level 3, we have being overdosed on medication. So, I am a type 1 diabetic, and I developed that when I was 6 years old. For anyone who doesn't know, type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease where the body will just attack itself and destroy parts of itself. It is hereditary, it is not influenced by lifestyle, it just happens. It happened to my grandmother, it happened to my uncle, and then it happened to me. So since the age of 6, I have been fully insulin dependent. And my father was typically the one administering those injections. He would give me my shot before a meal, but he would always give it much longer before the meal than was medically recommended. So it is typically recommended to give a shot concurrent with the meal. So you start eating, you take the shot, or you can take it a little before, you can take it a little bit after you start. But he would be giving me a shot typically an hour before the meal would be ready. I don't know exactly why. My best guess is that he grew up watching his mother, my grandmother, being diabetic and treating her diabetes the way it was treated back then in the 60s and 70s, I believe. And it was treated differently back then. Insulin worked differently. There were much slower types of insulin back then. So I know however she was treating it herself back then was appropriate for the time and was medically recommended. I think he was trying to do the same with me and not understanding or recognizing or caring that modern insulin is faster and stronger, and So he was giving me a very large dose of insulin for this huge meal that he had planned, but he was giving it to me on an empty stomach, and there was no food coming along with it. So most of the time, before the meal was served, I would start getting a severe low blood sugar. And if you haven't experienced a severe low blood sugar yourself, it is terrifying. It feels like dying. You lose focus because your brain doesn't have sugar for energy. I describe it like a life bar in a video game, because it basically is. It is the fuel that your body needs to function. So for me, that presents as weakness. I would start to get a cold sweat. I would shake. I would get a very bad brain fog because my brain would have no energy to function. My vision would blur, and I would see lines and lights, and it would be almost impossible to read anything or to see clearly. I would start spasming, and on multiple occasions, I would lose consciousness and have to be taken to the ER. Despite how many times that happened, he did not alter how he dosed me or when, and it just kept happening. So for a long period of time, I was overdosing on insulin almost every day. So while the long-term effects of repeated high blood sugar can be more severe, severe low blood sugar does have long-term effects. It can affect the heart because of the strain on it. It can affect long-term ability to detect low blood sugar, which is definitely something that I deal with as an adult. Like, I will sleep through low blood sugar and I just kind of won't be aware of it. And it can cause brain damage. I think my brain is mostly fine, but I have no idea what might have been impaired or if those effects will show later in life in the form of memory issues. I've gotten better at reacting to it now, but I also used to have severe anxiety when I would get a low blood sugar because it reminded me of that feeling of almost dying over and over. So now we're on level 4. Level 4 is going to be pretty bad. I know the others were a ray of sunshine, but level 4 is going to be really bad. We're starting off with something that I forgot until I was talking about the Hawaiian roll with cheese situation earlier. And I forgot about it until I was going to say that I recreated that meal and that eating situation as a photo project many years ago before I had really started talking about my experiences. I just tried to recreate it as a photo. Recreating it as a photo turned out these images. You might notice something odd about where I'm eating, and that is because for a period from 10 to at least 14, my sister and I's sleeping schedules were completely different. And I don't know exactly why that was. I think it had something to do with the yard work that my father was having my sister do, and I think things just got out of sync because we never really had a clear schedule. So for some time, I would be awoken by my father and taken to just hang out and exist awake in the bathroom while my sister slept. So I would just spend hours at a time in the bathroom. I would typically just read, or I had like coloring books. Sometimes as I got older, I would journal, I would draw, and I would eat in there. And I would eat just as the photo shows. I would sit on the edge of the tub, and I would use the lid of the toilet as a table. Unsurprisingly, the bathroom was not very clean, ever. He didn't like to flush the toilet. because there were plumbing issues. So a lot of times the toilet would have multiple uses just chilling in it with the lid closed. When I wasn't eating in the bathroom, if I was just sitting in there and hanging out, I would typically sit on the toilet lid itself, which had like one of those towel shag covers to it. Not that, anything makes it better, but I was at least not sitting on the hard tub's edge the entire time. I was pretty much just sitting on the toilet reading. So the next topic is why I mentioned mild CSA as a potential trigger in this video. So as I'd said earlier, the room that my sister and I existed in was about 5 by 9. And so we would sleep in that same area, and when it's me and her, we had a decent amount of room. It was, 5 feet is fairly wide, so I had my side to sleep on, she had hers. And we would basically just sleep on some, thin body pillows laid out. I did at least get to arrange my pillows in the most comfortable way, but we were pretty much just sleeping on the floor. As we got older, I would say around when I was 12, 13, most nights my father would decide to sleep in there with us. He would sleep between us, and because of the dimensions of that space, it was a very tight fit. I'm very glad it never became anything else. He never turned towards us. He would always just sleep peacefully on his back without a care in the world. But I was always afraid that something would happen, and I just didn't want to be that close to him. As I said, we would have stacks of newspapers on one side, and that was the side that I slept on. So I would just turn on my side and press myself as close as possible to those stacks of newspapers just to make sure there was any space between us. And like I said, he didn't try to encroach on that. He didn't turn towards me, but he just didn't care that he was taking up so much space with us, or that I assume he knew that I was not comfortable. I never said anything. I never protested. I would just turn over and try to get as far away from him as I could. And that is why these days I am an insanely good silent crier because I would just press up against those newspapers and cry, and I knew I had to be silent about it. As I said in my last video, my mother worked full-time, so she would often already be asleep in their room, and I think she had mentioned to me that she didn't want to share a bed with him, and so he would respect that somehow and sleep in our room, our bed, instead. She knew that I didn't like that he did that, and as I got older and I had a phone, I would text her hoping that she would wake up and switch with him. And when she was able to, she would. When she woke up, she would, or she would try to already be settling in our space at bedtime, and then he wouldn't protest. But if she wasn't already there, he would take up that space. In a similar vein, the last thing on level 4 is that he would just touch me. Not touch me, but he would just touch my body to annoy me. And I do think that's all it was. I think he was just he got a kick out of it. He would like laugh when I just didn't want to be touched. He never touched me in intimate areas when he was trying to annoy me. But again, I was kind of expecting it to escalate because I knew things like that usually escalated. And I would typically be sitting in that room, usually just wearing shorts because it was summer and it was hot. It was Florida. It was always hot in Florida. So he would just hang out in that room a lot. So it wasn't even usually just like our room to be in. It was where the TV was. It was where we ate. And so a lot of times he would just sit in that room as well, watching TV or reading the newspaper or whatever. In his corner, he had like a stack of pillows on top of a big cooler that he would sit on. Some of these things I'm remembering as I'm talking about them. I just remembered the cooler with the pillows stacked on top of it that we would set up for him. By the time this was happening, most days I would be in my corner, which was like on the same side of the room, but a bit away from him, on my laptop that had unrestricted internet access because he didn't understand the internet and it kept me busy and he just didn't care what I was doing. So the way I would be using that is I would have the laptop on top of like the box that it came in. And that usually kind of like guarded my body from him and he wouldn't try that hard to reach around it. But if I didn't have my legs like crisscrossed behind that box, if I had a leg sticking out, he would just poke it or try to tickle my foot, and he would do that kind of up my legs. And I didn't like that. I was not comfortable with that. Even like regardless of what the motive was. I don't think broadly speaking that he was attracted to children or me or my sister. I don't think he was doing it to get any type of gratification for himself other than the enjoyment of annoying us and controlling our bodies. And there's no excuse for touching people in a way that they don't want to be touched. I never asked why he was doing it. He could tell that I didn't enjoy it, and he would just kind of laugh about it and keep doing it, but he wouldn't try that hard to if it wasn't convenient. When we would go out in public, he would always try to hold my hand when going through a parking lot, which makes sense for a child that doesn't know any better, but he would be doing this when I was 14, 15, and by that point, I would not resist, but I would literally just kind of hold my arm limp, so it would look like he was just kind of dragging me. That didn't stop it, and no one ever really took note, but that was my only passive resistance was just not participating actively. Level 5 is going to contain the most violent, traumatizing thing that ever happened to me, as well as something bordering even closer to CSA. So the incident, or as I've called it in my notes, the shower scene, is something that happened when I was 6 years old. When I was 6 years old, I started developing type 1 diabetes, as mentioned earlier in the video. And the symptoms of uncontrolled type 1 diabetes are thirst, fever, nausea, lethargy, and it can disguise itself as like a stomach bug at first, and that's what my parents thought I had. So they were giving me lots of fluids, which meant giving me lots of juice, which was just spiking my blood sugar even more, and it was going into wildly uncontrolled high levels. My mother wanted to take me to a doctor, and my father didn't, and he never liked doctors. He didn't trust them. I don't know his exact motives, but he was refusing to take me to a doctor. He was like, oh, it's a bug, she'll get better. And I just was not getting better, and I didn't get better until one day I just passed out and had to be taken to the ER. But before that happened, I woke up one day and I needed to use the bathroom really badly. So I went to the edge of the doorway of our room that we were in, and I just called out, I need to use the bathroom, or I need to go to the bathroom, because that is how I would get attention to use the bathroom. So I did that. He came and got me, and he took me to the bathroom, and I went, and everything was fine so far. And then I remarked that I was thirsty. So he gave me some grape juice, and I almost immediately threw it up. And I don't know what it was about that set him off, but he just immediately got angry. He picked me up and put me in the tub. He turned on the water on cold, and we didn't have a shower head. We would just fill a big gulp cup from the faucet and like dump it over ourselves to rinse off. And so he would fill the cup. He would just throw the cold water on me, in my face, and then he would yell in my face to turn around. He would kick me very hard, and then he repeated that for a few minutes. And then when he was done, he just sent me back to sleep. And for a while in my childhood, as I was watching these TV shows and learning what trauma was, I would remember that happened to me, and I would think, it's interesting that I'm not really traumatized from that. Like, I remember it happening, but I don't feel any lasting effects from it. It doesn't give me nightmares. It doesn't keep me up at night. And then something just changed when I was about 12, because I was having an argument with my sister. We used to argue a lot, because she felt that I was spoiled because I wasn't punished as severely. I wasn't physically punished as much. And I knew, because my mother had actually told me, that the fact that I had almost died and that he had been so violent and angry with me when I had almost died had actually scared him a bit. And after that, he did not punish me violently as much as my sister. And so I think she didn't understand that, because she didn't know that happened to me. And I think that she felt it was unfair, and I was spoiled because I was treated better than her. And I was also the younger child. I think that's typical for the younger child. But something kind of just snapped in my head, and I said to her, like I'm only treated better now because because he did something so horrible to me, and then actually felt a little bit of guilt for it. And after that is when I couldn't stop thinking about it, when I would have flashbacks about it. And so I think it kind of just makes sense that as I was, becoming a teenager and maturing, that's when the real effects of that as a trauma occurred, because nothing else really reminded me of it or brought it to the surface before then. The last thing on level 5 is never being able to shower or use the toilet with any privacy. That's probably not surprising, considering everything that we've covered so far, but in addition to needing to be escorted to the bathroom and supervised, I was not allowed to clean up after myself on my own. I was sometimes allowed to once I was like 15, but that was right before my mother and I left, so I barely remember it, and it's just not a significant portion of time. And I don't know for certain, but the more I've talked about it as an adult and kind of looked at him through the lens of an adult seeing his actions, I think it was done more so to prevent me from interacting with my own body and accidentally discovering anything, more than it was him wanting to interact with my body. Because it was always done very plainly, very clinically. I never got the impression that he was getting any additional enjoyment from it. That doesn't change the fact that I did not want him engaging with me in that way, or that as a child, watching shows about trauma and abuse towards children, I interpreted it as that type of touch. And I remember there was a metal hamper in front of the toilet that had like all of the bathroom stuff on top of it, like the air fresh, I don't know why there was air freshener in there, it was never used, but just like all the bottles in the bathroom, and there was probably stuff in it like toilet paper. And that was in front of the toilet, and every time that would happen and I would need to be wiped, I would lean forward and stare at it. And so I remember what it looked like so clearly. It was this old pale metal hamper with a flat metal lid, and the front of it had white flowers and cotton painted onto it, but it was also rusted and peeling. And that is just what I would like stare at and lock onto every time that was happening. And so I also wasn't allowed to wash with any privacy unless I did it when my mother was home. So I would do my best to only request a shower when only my mother was home, which was a rare occasion and usually only on a weekend. So for most of my teens, I would only shower once a week because I was more comfortable being literally unhygienic than feeling dirty by having to shower with his assistance as a teenager. As I became a teenager and my body developed, I would start wearing bras, and I would not voluntarily take my bra off when he put me into the bath to rinse off, and he wouldn't make me take it off. And usually during the bath, he would actually close the curtain and say, okay, now take your bra off and wash your chest. So he would actually willingly, deliberately give me privacy to take my bra off, wash my chest, and then I would just put it back on. But I was still fully uncovered other than the bra, and so that didn't feel like much of a generosity, but I was glad to have any sort of privacy that I could get, and I'm glad I at least had that. There are certainly little things here and there that I've either forgotten or that I am now thinking of, and I don't know where to place them on the chart, but it's kind of impossible at the moment when I am just starting to arrange everything that happened to me in my head and in documents to put everything in its place. So for now, I think that's pretty comprehensive. I will be doing a second video in the style of the first video where I will just be answering questions that are on the video and cover a range of topics, because, as I said before, it is a lot easier for me to be given a topic to speak about than to arrange everything myself and think about it in a linear, organized way. If you've made it through to the end of this video and you are still here, bravo! That was a lot for me to get through, and that's stuff that I already know and that's just always with me in my mind. So props to you for getting through all that and still being here. And if you would like some eye bleach or some ear bleach, I have some lighthearted videos on my channel. I have an ASMR channel that can help you sleep. If you've experienced anything similar to what I've spoken about so far, and it's hard to imagine a good life after that, I completely understand that, but I want you to know that it is possible. And I've gotten a lot of comments saying that it's either helped people come to terms with their own upbringing or given them hope that they can be normal like me. I wouldn't say I'm normal, but I am pretty functioning. I have a great circle of friends, and I'm quite happy in my life. I appreciate everyone who has reached out or commented to say that it's been helpful for them. And I'll see you all next time. I love doing YouTube. And I'll see you all next time. Bye!